So good afternoon everybody, a slightly different film from me today. I'm actually in the Lake District National Park and I've been travelling for the last couple of hours and I've just about reached Wasdale, which is in the western side of the Lake District. It's quite a big trip for me, but I've come to check out a little location with a view to coming back at some time in the future. So what's basically happened is that my portfolio has now been exhausted. The places that I had in mind that I wanted to shoot over the last 10 years or so, I've been to and done, and I'm really quite happy with those shots. So I've started to look further afield for new locations. Now I did think that I could do this film at the PC and sit and talk at great length about planning and preparation, do's and don'ts, but I thought what better way to do it than to actually take you out with me and do it on location. So I'm currently heading to a little place, and I think it's called Riston's Force at the Wasdale Head. It's right at the far end of the lake. I'm going to look at that first, and then I am going to drop back on another location which hopefully can take on Wasdale Screes. Now, that particular shot is an evening shot. The light is only good for that image for around about 2 or 3 weeks of the year in September, so that's one of the big ones that I'm planning to do in the future. But for now it's just about getting out, checking out some new locations and building that next section of portfolio images ready for the future. So one of the real key things with my photography is that I like to just get 1, maybe 2 images maximum from a location. I'm very much into finding just that sweet spot. I've nothing against photographers that go and get lots and lots of different images from a session, but personally speaking, I'm almost like the specimen fisherman. I like to get the big fish, or what I consider to be the big fish. It's that one image that I've got going on up here that I want to bag for my portfolio, and that's the way I tend to shoot. So we'll get to the car park at the far end of the lake, get the gear on, go for a walk, and I'll get to the force and I will be looking for that sweet spot. Once I've found that, if we get some overcast light, I might even have a go at it. But failing that, we'll discuss the composition, why I like it, and then we'll get back in the car and hopefully if there's time we'll go and check out this second location for that lovely evening shot. So I will see you shortly. That was nice and easy. I reckon it was about 3/4 of a kilometre from the car, and it's a nice gentle slope, nice and easy access. I must just point out that when you get to the larch woodland behind me, don't be tempted to hop over the fence. You can hear the waterfall, and as photographers we're always eager to get there, but if you walk about 20 yards further up, there's a gate with lovely easy access to this cracking area here, brilliant for a place for a picnic. I will say that it's midweek at the moment and it's nice and quiet. It probably gets fairly busy at the weekends. So over to my left I can see that the waterfall section comes to an end, it flattens out, so I'm going to spend my time looking down in that direction. I think that's probably where the interest is. So fingers crossed I can find that lovely shot that I'm looking for. So this is the first time I have ever set eyes on this waterfall, and I have to say looks of images on the internet and in books can be very deceiving. It's not what I expected, and all credit to the photographers that have done this place justice, because it's not an easy place, to do. My problems that I'm faced with at the moment are the deadfall that's come down the waterfall. You're always going to get that though. There's a big old nasty trunk there, and there's one at the side of the main fall, which is a problem. I may move back and take a shot from further back and have the waterfall as a subdominant feature rather than a dominant feature. Other issues, the rocks down here and here, they're picking up the highlights, so this is definitely a scene that needs doing in overcast conditions. I did think there might be enough canopy above to give me the conditions at any time of day under any lighting conditions. But like I said, the pictures that you see on the internet and in books are very, very deceiving. I will end on a big positive, and that the rocks in the stream bed, the pebbles and boulders, have got a lovely bluey green colour to them, and that will really pick up so well on a process file. So it's just a case of get the bag off, get the camera out, and having a wander around and try and find that composition that works and excludes all that mess. Okay, so I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. I'm struggling, if I'm honest. The compositions don't jump out at you, and I have a general rule that says if I've got to think about a shot, chances are it's never going to work. So I'll head down to the first area and show you what the problems are there. So with each section that I talk about, I want to try my best to get the camera into position so you can see the reasons why I'm discounting certain sections. So this is the very bottom fall, and there's a nice little section there, and got this lovely deep pool which has got some beautiful colours beneath it, but clearly we've got this what looks like a wych elm that's really interrupting the foreground. So what you'd have to do, you'd have to frame it from here and try and shoot at this oblique angle. You're not really going to get any lead in there of the from where you stood. You will get the nice colours, but there's quite a lot of stuff that's out of the water as well, a lot of boulders, and the interest is really tucked over to one side. So for that reason it doesn't work for me. And also, crucially, you can't see any of the other parts of the fall. So you've not got that story that takes your eye down and into the scene and out through the bottom there. So this one is definitely a no-go. So slightly upstream from the last shot, probably about 10 metres, something like that. This is definitely better. You've got the natural flow of the waterfall taking your eye through the image, and you've also got this lovely pool in front, a middle cascade, so it's got a lot of the elements needed to make a good shot. But here come the problems. All the boulders off to this side are really distracting. They're going to pick up all the bright highlights on the surfaces where the mosses are quite dark and the lichens are quite light, so they're going to be really quite distracting and keep bringing your eye to that side. You can darken them in post, but it's always better to try and get the composition right when you're here. The other problem that we've got is that the rowan tree that's coming over the stream bed there, at the moment I've got the camera positioned that little branch doesn't interrupt the waterfall. If I move the camera that way and there's a place where I can position myself, it's a beautiful shot, but that branch is a real problem. It interrupts the flow of that back fall there, and I don't like that. We need to see all of that in the shot. We need that natural flow, and the key thing is we don't need anything that spoils the image. We've got to try and eliminate all the distractions and only keep in the good stuff. So for that reason, I need to move on. So I think this is where the image is probably going to need to be taken from. I've managed to exclude the tree, and if I move out just slightly to the right here, I can exclude this big boulder as well. It's still quite a messy foreground, and my thought is that if I put the polarizer on, we can put through some of the reflected threads through the water and get some of those nice colours from underneath of the rocks, and maybe that will take your attention away from the boulders that's sticking out of the water. They're definitely not in any sort of arrangement that appeals to me. So it's definitely a compromise shot, it's not ideal. And the other thing is as well is to make sure the camera's tilted down to exclude the sky at the back there. So the waterfall is just about coming into the top of the frame. It would have been nice ideally to have had a bit more hillside just to give that waterfall the top of it, so a little bit more room to breathe. So am I really getting excited about this shot? Probably not, it's the honest answer. But sometimes you've got to come to these places and just try and make the best of it. And if you're not completely happy, just don't come back and tick it off your list and move on. So in position, it doesn't look too bad. It's nice to see that water coming into the camera, and that certainly helps to lift the way the image looks. And typically with any waterfall, when you slow the water down, it always looks appealing, and you can often make a poor composition look quite bad simply by the fact that the water takes your eye away from all the distractions. I've got the polarizer on, it's definitely helping to remove the reflections. If you see now, I move that through, so I just turn that on. If I move that round, you can see
definitely removing a lot of that reflected surface, and you're seeing the coloration of the pebbles below. So it's not going to be too bad of a shot. I had thought that this might work in autumn, but when I look at the typical species that you get along a watercourse in an upland stream like this, a lot of common alder, and that generally doesn't take on the autumn colour, sadly, so it's probably not going to be worth coming back in autumn for that reason. I'm going to take the shot now. I'm on f16, and I can take it back and I can have a look at it on the PC when I get home and have a real think about whether it's worth coming all this way just for this shot. I'm going to take 2 images, one exposed to the foreground and a safety shot for the waterfall, because I have a feeling that over the long exposure it's going to get a bit burnt out, and I want to try and keep the detail in the water as much as possible. So 2 shots. As always, mirror lock up, 2-second timer. That's the first one done. Second shot, underexposed ever so slightly by about a shot. And that's the second shot done. I'll put that on now and we'll have a quick discussion.
So here we have the unprocessed raw file, and what we've basically got here to start with is the 2 images that I took, one for the waterfall, the bright parts of the scene, and a second shot for the overall scene, taking into consideration all the general tones. What I did mention in the film, and I'll say again, when you take an image, the parts of the photograph that are excluded are just as important as the parts of the image that are included. So it's all about trying to find that balance of inclusion and exclusion to try and make your picture as complementary as possible. With this scene, I did feel there were lots of problems, and I'll go through those now. So what I generally do when I get an image back, and it's a process I go through when I'm also on location, is that I compile a list of likes and dislikes. So we'll start with the dislikes, we'll start with the bad first, and then we'll move on to the likes. So initially, I didn't like the actual composition in itself. There's no easy route through the scene. Your eye fights to find its way through to the main part of the image, which is the waterfall at the background. It keeps getting interrupted by all these rocks. The second thing I didn't like was the dead branches. Now, I could get rid of those in Photoshop, but I've got to ask myself, is it really worth all the effort? Is it going to make the image so much better that it's worth going to all that trouble? And probably not in this case. Like I already said, the rocks are just everywhere. It's like a boulder field almost, and they just interrupt the natural flow of the water. That was one of the big things for me that I didn't like. The waterfall itself at the back, to my mind, is not sufficiently large enough to make your eye go through the visual journey from the start to the finish. It's not sufficient enough to rest upon and make you feel comfortable viewing. I find that the foreground is too dominant, and you're constantly fighting to look between the two, and my eye is always drawn to the foreground as opposed to the background. And in photography, I feel that your eye should make your way through the scene rather than keep being drawn back to the foreground all the time. It's all about a visual journey. So let's look at the likes. Certainly the case polarizer that I'm now using has done a wonderful job of cutting through all that reflected surface. You can see all the boulders at the bottom of the stream bed, nice and colourful, and also the vegetation has taken on a beautiful deep green saturated look, and that I really like. The choice of lens, I went for a 28mm wide angle lens to exaggerate that foreground, but like I already said, it's competing against, sorry, it's not competing, it's sort of fighting to keep your attention in that immediate foreground. I like the strength of that foreground, but it just needed that background to keep you pulling through the scene. So the wide angle lens has helped, but it's also hindered in many respects. So when you look at the pros and cons of the images, the likes and dislikes, I counting up, I seem to have 5 dislikes and only 2 likes, and for that reason this image is probably going to get left alone. I probably won't go back to it. So now let's quickly look at the processed image, the finished image that I ended up with, where I've tried to make a scene that's more complementary to the eye. So now we've got an entirely different shot altogether, a much more pleasing image, although it still hasn't got rid of many of the problems that I've discussed on the earlier shot. Basically what we've got here is an image that's 80% processing and only 30% composition quality in my view. This, to a large extent, as far as my photography goes, the percentages are completely the wrong way around in favour of time in front of the computer, which to me is not what I like to do. I like to spend time in the field, getting the images right in the field and spending as little time on the computer as possible. I have used in this instance to create this image a high number of radial filters, and what that's done is created a lighter central portion that helps to draw your eye only through the middle of the scene. I've darkened the foreground so your eye doesn't keep sitting on that strong foreground interest, lightened the central portion ever so slightly, and then lightened even further the background. I've also used an overall radial filter to vignette the corners of the image, again just pushing your eye centrally. One of the things I did do as well, I found that the rocks were too bright and they created these big white circular hot spots that drew your eye to each one of them. Basically your eye was just scattering around looking at the different rocks. So I've selectively toned down each rock, again using a radial filter. Crucially though, what I've done is I took a third image when I was on location, and I've used that to create the soft misty effects of the waterfall. The third shot was using a 6-stop filter, and what that did was it gave me a very, very long exposure in this instance, and it picked up the spray of the waterfall. So I've just blended in that small section of the waterfall just to create that lighter portion, and that all in all just keeps your eye moving towards that background interest and takes you through that visual journey. So in essence, what I've created here is a picture that isn't great to begin with, but we've made the best of it with the processing power of the computer. So that just about concludes this film. I really hope you've enjoyed watching it and you've taken something away from it. You've certainly seen my thought processes now when I'm choosing a new landscape location. And what I'm looking for ultimately is a location, a new spot where I don't have to spend hours and hours trying to get it right to the computer. It's all about good location scouting, and that's what basically this film has been about. This image will not make it into my portfolio. I will show it on various social media, but in terms of the website, it just doesn't make the cut for all the reasons I've already discussed. What I will say before I go is thank you, Mark, for pointing out that not all my films are getting through to you all. So what I would say is check back on the back catalogue and see if you've missed any, see if any haven't come up on your notifications inbox. If that's the case, I've looked into it and it seems that if you unsubscribe and resubscribe and ring the notifications bell, it should fix the issue. So please go ahead and do that. It's very important to keep the subscriber count up and also the view count going for the channel to grow, and I would really appreciate that. So I'm going to leave it there and say thank you very much for watching. Leave those comments in the box below about all things in terms of scouting locations and the processing applied to this photograph. I would really be interested to see what your thoughts are on that. So until next time, as always, bye for now.